Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of World Panorama. Like always, get ready to catch up on the biggest international news of the week. I'm Sana Khan. Before we get you detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories. America is back from the brink for now. Government shutdown ends after 16 days. World Panorama takes a look at why the fiscal war isn't over just yet. Diplomacy with Iran inches forward. Nuclear talks end on an upbeat note. Iran offers concessions. Next talks now scheduled for November. In a daring move, Saudi Arabia leaves the UN stunned, rejects a seat in the Security Council. And the greatest footballer ever, Pele, launches a limited edition book on his career. The legend breaks down as he recalls his celebrated career. Our top story this week. In an 11th hour deal, the US Congress passed a bipartisan bill which was quickly signed into a law by President Barack Obama on Thursday to end a 16-day government shutdown and avert a historic debt default by the world's largest economy that could have global repercussions. The deal was welcomed around the world, but anxiety persisted about America's long-term stability. Because let's tell you, the fix is temporary and the crisis could be revisited 3 months down the line because the legislation raises the debt ceiling only till 7th February and funds the government through January 15th. But it gives the Democratic administration and Republican Congress breathing time and space to negotiate a longer-term deal without pressure of imminent default. Although past record in this matter is not encouraging, clearly it's not over till it's over. The impasse fought over government spending in general and Obama's new healthcare program in particular had shuttered national parks and monuments and mostly closed down agencies, NASA and the Environmental Protection Agency. Standard & Poor's estimated the shutdown has taken a $24 billion hit. We will be talking more about this. Joining me on the show this week is Professor P Vijayalakshmi. She's from the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining me on the show. But before I come to you, let's have a look at this report.
On this vote, the yeas are 285, the nays are 144. The motion is adopted.
The United States closely averted its first default in its history on Wednesday night after the Senate announced an 11th-hour compromise deal to reopen the government and raise the debt ceiling until early next year.
Tonight, the unnecessary shutdown America has been enduring for 16 days comes to an end. Thank you, Speaker Boehner, for finally allowing a majority of House members to reopen government and avoid a default that would have clearly wreaked havoc on our economic credibility and the stability of our country.
The Senate has now voted to approve this agreement, and Democrats and Republicans in the House still have an important vote to take. But I want to thank the leaders of both parties for getting us to this point. Once this agreement arrives on my desk, I will sign it immediately. We'll begin reopening our government immediately.
Following the deal, shares in Tokyo closed higher, while in Europe they fell slightly in early trading. Big Asian exporters, including China and South Korea, also faced the risk of a slump in global demand if a US default had disrupted other economies. China's government, which is Washington's biggest foreign creditor with $1.3 trillion invested in treasuries, welcomed the end to the standoff.
美国是世界最大的经济体，美国妥善地处理有关问题，符合美国自身的利益，也有利于世界经济的稳定和发展。我们对美国处理有关问题取得的进展。
Experts say the controversy over the debt ceiling was on account of low efficiency of the political structure of the United States.
The U.S. Congress is more polarized than any time in my memory. It's really unfortunate. There's too many party line votes. There's too much bickering between the parties, so it's not easy to get things done. And that's a problem right now.
Ultimately, the agreement stacked up as a political achievement for Barack Obama, who refused to negotiate on changes to the healthcare law, and a defeat for Republicans, who were driven by Tea Party conservatives in their ranks and suffered a backlash in public opinion polls. But the congressional vote is only a temporary ceasefire between Republicans and the White House.
All right, Professor Vijayalakshmi, now this was a last-minute deal, that raised the US debt ceiling. But tell our viewers as to why this is not a very permanent solution. It's just temporary.
Well, they're going to go through this till January 15th. The funding is only up to January 15th. Till February 7th, that time will be given, when the real issue that brought about this shutdown, that is the differences over spending, tax reform, entitlements, and affordable health care, which is also called as Obamacare,
right,
the funding of it. So I think in broad terms, those have not been resolved. So this time period is going to see an intense political battle over budget. And as you may have recalled, there is Senator Patty Murray and Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan is very keen on balanced budget, and that doesn't seem to be happening if you keep raising your debt ceiling.
Right.
So clearly the battle lines are still drawn. Budget problems will come to the forefront now, and the focus will be on how you can actually look at the issue now. What are the compromises? But there's one silver lining in this. When you talked about this sudden, aversion in the last minute, there were actually 14 senators who got together, 6 Democrats, 7 Republicans. Susie Collins from Maine started this when one day, she just walked up to the postrum, and said, look, let's start legislating instead of just shouting at each other. And that began a bipartisan effort,
right,
which actually didn't finally see the deal. I mean, the deal was not exactly what that plan was of that 14, but many elements of that were, incorporated. One critical one for the Republicans was the checking up of the people who are entitled to Obamacare,
right,
a stricter security, that kind of thing. So I think you're seeing a couple of tough months ahead for both the parties, because given that this is also an election time in
right,
the United States in November, and the Democrats have got a great boost because in this particular shutdown,
in fact, I was just going to ask you that. So the Democrats have, it's like a small victory for them in a way, and the Republicans have really lost their ratings in this fiasco.
Well, 44% of the Republicans actually opposed the shutdown, but it is the Tea Partiers who were insistent, and it was just not they were not able to politically come together, the Republican Party, that is. And therefore, they have, sometimes a bad opposition gives you a better boost than your performance. Right. So perhaps that's one of the things, because they are going to have to deal with this debt crisis sooner than later. They can't keep increasing the debt ceiling. So you will see more battles ahead. But whether it's going to be as bitter as this, or will those 14 again continue to do work and try and get something similar going in the House is a matter for us to watch.
Now, this has been going on for quite some time, and we have been discussing this particular topic on the show quite a bit. But now that it's over for the moment, it's going to be better to look at what's been happening. America has missed some of the key world events in this, like for the APEC summit, a lot of visits that have been cancelled by Barack Obama. So how has really that, panned out or will pan out for the US on the world stage?
Very good question, Fana, and I think a picture speaks 1,000 words. Last week, if you see the picture of APEC summit, you see the Chinese president, the Russian president, along with American traditional allies, all standing in the podium and waving, and John Kerry actually standing quite far away. I mean, it was quite a picture. And that, I think it's dealt a serious blow. And I think APEC itself showed it, because here's this administration which made a huge deal out of pivoting to Asia, and Asia Pacific.
Right.
And therefore, this particular event was to showcase some of the translations or interpretations of that pivot strategy. Instead, it became so clear that America's soft power, Joseph Nye, the Harvard professor, used to talk about that. And he himself has commented that, this is something which really punches credibility. Because, the biggest credibility, cultural values, etc. But, really it's about effective governance and management of an international reserve currency.
Yeah.
So the consequences are not just domestic politics, but international, fiscal, and monetary world. So there is a a much stronger case now that the Chinese can actually go out and say, well, it's time maybe the world should de-Americanize, right? So that's one. The other reactions also we saw from Russia, writing, you know, in New York Times, Putin had said that, look, this is a country which is using brute force and its soft power doesn't seem to be working, etc. Right. So that'll come back to haunt them now, because that was in the case of Syria.
Yeah, you're talking about the article earlier on,
that New York Times one, you know, when the Syrian crisis, just before the final deal. So there's going to be a little more, I think, maneuvering and leveraging of this gap that the Americans, or the American shutdown has created. And the third thing is also about its traditional allies. They announced, you know, the Chinese announced, I think, quite a number of packages. I don't know the exact number, maybe about 50 billion, in terms of surging trade. They promised surging trade, etc., to Thailand, to Indonesia, Malaysia, all, you know, in US, for US. This is, I think, very important. And you look at also the Middle East. Now, there are two reasons why Middle East is very, very unstable at the moment, or very uneasy at the moment.
Right.
One is, of course, Iran. And whether the Americans, you know, if they flirt with Iran, then the Saudis are saying, oh, what's happening?
Right.
And deep down, you know, for now, they have this fear now, this shale gas bonanza, you know, the domestic oil that America has found. Is that going to make them independent? And therefore, what will their policy behavior be?
Right.
You know, is a real, for any client, I think, you know, if a buyer starts looking differently, then you're saying, you know, the idea was oil for security, right? So where's that going to go?
Right.
And Iran complicates that question. And then finally, Israel.
Right.
Israel also is worrying about Iran and saying, you know, this is a brute force and muscular force. Well, this is Obama who's saying we will withdraw from Afghanistan, from Iraq, wouldn't go to fight in Syria.
Right.
So, you know, there also,
So basically,
I think there
in
are
all
some
of this challenging situation that we've seen, you mentioned some very crucial points, how Obama now will have to get his act together in this limited amount of time, and also keeping the fact in mind that the Republicans might once again use the Obamacare, you know, legislation as a bargaining chip, you know, before the, you know, the debt ceiling deadline ends in February. Thank you so much, Professor Vijayalakshmi. It was a pleasure having you on the show with me.
Thank you. But I just want to conclude by saying that I think still, domestically, the Democrats have gained.
Right. Thank you so much. On that note, we're taking a very short break, but on the other side, no solution in sight in the continuing crisis in Syria. All hopes are now on Geneva too. I'll be back. Thanks for staying with us. On Syria, things seem to be moving ahead. Or not. The dates have been set for late November Geneva II peace talks. The talks were proposed by Moscow and Washington as a means of getting the Syrian government and the opposition behind the negotiating table in the hope of ending the 2.5-year-long civil strife. But not all the players are on board. Here's more. Syria's Deputy Prime Minister announced the final dates for an international conference to discuss a political solution to his country's conflict, November 23rd and 24th.
اليوم نحن أقرب ما نكون إلى جنيف 2 بمحادثاتنا بوزارة الخارجية أبلغنا بالمواعيد التقريبية لانعقاده الافتراضية لانعقاده.
But even now, it's unclear whether the conference that the US and Russia have been trying to convene for months will indeed take place. The main Western-backed Syrian opposition group has not decided whether to attend, and many rebel fighters inside Syria flatly reject negotiating with President Bashar al-Assad's regime. The government, meanwhile, has refused to talk with the armed opposition.
There is one specific condition that we are putting forward. We want Geneva to be about transformation, transition to democracy. Transition to democracy means that the Assad regime, who is responsible for killing so many people, does not, and Assad himself and those who are responsible for killing Syrians, will not have a place in a future Syria.
Earlier, US Secretary of State John Kerry said it was urgent to set a date for the Geneva II meeting on the future of Syria.
We believe that President Assad has lost the legitimacy necessary to be able to be a cohesive force that could bring people together. And that it is clear that in implementing Geneva I, which is the only purpose for having the Geneva Conference now, that there has to be a transition government. There has to be a new governing entity in Syria in order to permit the possibility of peace. This will require all the parties to come together in good faith.
Meanwhile, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad made a rare public appearance attending prayers at a Damascus mosque to mark the start of the Muslim holiday of Eid.
Allahu Akbar. معركة الجسد الواحد طيران النظام يقصف حي الحميدية.
An amateur video posted on Tuesday showed an explosion said to be in Himediyeh district of Deir al-Zor, resulting from Syrian warplanes airstrikes. At least 27 government soldiers have been killed during intense clashes in Deir al-Zor. The violence came as Muslims observed the holiday of Eid al-Adha, or the Feast of Sacrifice, and underscored just how relentless the violence in Syria's civil war is. Iran appears ready to scale back activity of potential use in making nuclear bombs, suggesting it is now willing to compromise for a deal to win relief from harsh economic sanctions. In fact, details of Iran's proposals presented during 2 days of nuclear negotiations in Geneva with 6 world powers have not been released, and Western officials were unsure whether Tehran was prepared to go far enough to clinch a breakthrough deal.
As the second day of meetings gets underway in Geneva, Iran said its proposal has the capacity to make a breakthrough. Iran's deputy foreign minister has said that the nuclear proposal allows for unannounced inspections of Iran's nuclear facilities.
و همچنین در خصوص اینکه انتظار داریم همونطوری که هیئت ایرانی بسیار شفاف و مبسوط نظرات خودش رو در قالب طرح پیشنهادی مطرح کرده، انتظار داریم به همین شکل فردا ارزیابی اونها رو و نظرات اونها رو بشنویم و بتونیم جمع‌بندی داشته باشیم.
As it stands now, Iran is obliged to inform the International Atomic Energy Agency about all its activities regarding the nuclear fuel cycle. Lowering uranium enrichment levels could also be a part of a final deal. Arakchi on Tuesday gave brief details of Iran's offer. He said the first phase is expected to last 6 months and is aimed at restoring bilateral trust and avoiding measures which could aggravate the political climate. He said both parties must pledge to address immediate concerns and resolve disputes through dialogue. The 6 world powers in Iran are working out the nitty-gritties of Iran's suggestions.
There's a real opportunity to make progress in these talks, and I urge Iran to seize that opportunity, both today and in the weeks to come. The first day of talks, which took place yesterday between Iran and the E3+3, was useful. It did turn out to be a day for serious discussion. And so any decisions about sanctions must be related to decisions and actual developments, positive developments in the way that Iran pursues its nuclear program.
Говорили, что все участники переговоров должны четко заявить Ирану, что они не преследуют цель смены режима, а добиваются прояснения всех тех проблем, которые возникли у МАГАТЭ, и после прояснения этих проблем все санкции и иные препятствия для участия Ирана в международной жизни будут ликвидированы.
Western nations have demanded that Iran halt the production and stockpiling of its higher-grade uranium enrichment, and in return have offered to relax US and European Union sanctions on Iran.
Much else has been unfolding around the world. Here's a quick wrap of the other international news of the week.
Saudi Arabia on Friday rejected a seat on the UN Security Council to protest what it said was a lack of international efforts to end world conflicts. The Saudi discontent stems from its frustration with longtime ally United States. The two are at odds over a number of Middle East issues, including how Washington has handled some of the region's crises, particularly in Egypt and Syria. US President Barack Obama, at a meeting with Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta, praised Italy's economic reforms as helping take the recession-marred European nation in the right direction. Letta also congratulated Obama, while both leaders pledged to work together to advance US-EU trade talks and address security issues. Search teams scoured the Mekong River in Pakse, Laos on Friday for more victims of the Lao Airlines plane crash that killed all 49 people on board. Roughly a dozen bodies have been found since the crash on Wednesday. Thailand has deployed a team of soldiers to help with the search. The ATR-72 turboprop plane, flying from the Lao capital of Vientiane, crashed just 8 kilometers short of its destination Pakse, which is near the borders of both Thailand and Cambodia. Bad weather is being blamed for the cause of the crash. Attacks on Shia Muslims killed at least 59 people across Iraq on Thursday, including a suicide truck bomb targeting members of the country's Shabak minority. There was no immediate claim of responsibility for any of the attacks, but Shias are viewed as apostates by hardline Sunni Islamists who have been regrouping and gathering pace in an insurgency this year. Hundreds of thousands of Muslim pilgrims on 17th October concluded Hajj with no significant incidents reported by Saudi authorities. The authorities said a total of 1.98 million pilgrims performed Hajj this year against the 3.2 million who attended last year. The annual pilgrimage, one of the largest religious gatherings in the world, had previously been known to be prone to stampedes as pilgrims rushed to complete Hajj rituals and return home.
Shifting gears, time to bring you up to speed with all the sports news that you might have missed through this week. Here's all the sports action. Brazilian football legend Pelé broke down as he recalled his celebrated career during the launch of a new book. The 500-page limited edition book of the player, widely regarded as the greatest ever, weighs 15 kgs and has a recommended retail price of $1,700. Titled 1283, the number of goals Pelé scored, the book comprises of the exact number of texts. Masters champion Adam Scott stormed back from 4 shots behind with 10 holes remaining to clinch the 4-man PGA Grand Slam of golf by 2 strokes with a scintillating finish in Bermuda. The Australian, who had trailed by 3 after the opening round, eagled the par 5 17th to forge 2 ahead of overnight leader Justin Rose, then parred the last for a course record 7 under par 64. Golfer Rory McIlroy laid the blame for a winless 2013 on mental and mechanical issues, saying his struggles had nothing to do with an equipment switch, but the former world number 1 refused to talk about reports of a split with Caroline Wozniacki. McIlroy, speaking at a news conference in Seoul ahead of this week's Korea Open, deflected questions about his relationship with a Danish tennis player amid reports of the high-profile pair having broken up. During 1 week, life was a jungle for competitors who braved the Amazon rainforest in a grueling ultra-marathon won by Brazilian runner Marcelo Sinoca. The 245-kilometer jungle marathon challenge from Praia to Santarém in the northern state of Pará started with a river crossing, with swimmers having to drag their survival kits through the water. For the first time in 9 years of the race, the winner was a Brazilian, with Marcelo triumphing ahead of compatriot Rodrigo Sousa, with Basti Haag from Germany claiming the 3rd spot. A group of 25 daring mountain bikers unleashed some heart-stopping rides at the Red Bull Rampage in southern Utah. While the weather only allowed for 1 full run before the conditions made it impossible to ride, that was all that was needed for event veteran Kyle Strait to win the event for the 2nd time. Strait first competed in the event at only 14 years of age and first won it in 2004 when he was 17. Time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies, music and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap.
Hollywood action gods Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone will be seen together in a new film, Escape Plan.
Who were you before you came in here?
I break out of prisons for a living.
You don't look that smart.
You don't either.
The two men hit the red carpet in New York at the premiere of their film. Schwarzenegger has said that working with Stallone was a major motivation in taking the role. Stallone plays a structural engineer who tests prison security by being locked inside.
I'm gonna find out who, and I'm gonna find out why.
Hey, slow down.
Low-budget movie of good report is all set for release at the London Film Festival. The film was banned in South Africa due to its content. It's about an introverted high school teacher in rural South Africa who starts an obsessive affair with a pupil with tragic consequences. The movie has been accused of child pornography. According to Jamil Kubeka, the film would have never got this much attention had it not been initially banned in South Africa. Eleanor Catton became the youngest author to win the Man Booker Prize for her novel The Luminaries. Her book is the longest novel in the 45-year award history of the Man Booker Prize. Catton beat the likes of Callum Tobin, No Violet Bulawayo, Jhumpa Lahiri, Ruth Ozeki and the favourite Jim Crace. Christopher Bailey, the designer credited with restoring the cachet to fashion brand Burberry, is to become chief executive next year when the current boss, Angela Arhant, moves to Apple. Bailey joined Burberry in 2001. He held the major creative roles for 6 years, helping to rebuild the group.
That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. See you next week, same time, with more international news. Till then, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This week, I closed the show in Thailand, where more than 700 decorated water buffaloes were paraded before they took part in the 143rd annual race heralding the beginning of the rice harvesting season. The race is part of a week-long festival also celebrating the end of the rainy season.